recording. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you for having our paper. So the title of my presentation today is Information Design of Online Platforms. So we are motivated by the observation that online platforms have gathered a lot of consumer data. And this data and data analytics enable platforms to learn consumer preference. And this has two important applications. First, the platforms can use this information to personalize product recommendation for buyers. And second, the platforms can use this information via data analytics to offer targeted advertising for the sellers. So I'm going to offer a little bit of motivation for each of these two applications. For product recommendation, it's getting more and more important, actually become one of the most important revenue engine for e-commerce platforms. For example, for Amazon, it is claimed that product recommendation is responsible for more than 1/3 of the revenue generated. And for streaming services such as Netflix, it's even more. On the other hand, the target advertising, so here I'm showing you a chart that basically lists the biggest advertising platforms in the world. So if you look at the number 3 and number 4 are Alibaba, which is the largest e-commerce platform in China, and also Amazon. So Alibaba and Amazon, these online retail platforms have become one of the largest advertising platforms, only after Google and Meta. So our research questions are based on these two observations. We're wondering, how will product recommendation interact with targeted advertising? Are they two standalone decisions, or there is some inherent trade-off? So our take is that there is an inherent trade-off between them, because both of them can be seen as monetization of prominence. The idea is that consumers may have some limited attention, and therefore there's some prominent position on this platform. And the platform can either recommend a product to take the prominent position, or it can sell this prominent position through advertising to sellers. And due to this inherent trade-off, we're going to illustrate using a model that the platform needs to balance the sales commission and advertising revenue. Okay. And lastly, given we see so many ads these days on these e-commerce platforms, we're wondering about the social welfare implications of the sponsored ads on these e-commerce platforms. We're going to answer these research questions by recasting our question into a public information design problem. To be more specific, the platform is going to collect information, collect data from the about the match information, the match between the sellers and the buyers. And they're going to use this match information to communicate with buyers about which product is likely a match, and also communicate with the sellers about whether a buyer is likely the target. So you can think about this communication process as a product recommendation algorithm or a targeted advertising algorithm. So we're going to particularly consider an information design problem where the platform communicates this information to both the buyers and the sellers. And given the platform's information design, the buyers will decide, should I follow the platform's recommendation to buy the product, or should I continue to search other products? And the sellers will decide how much to advertise to become prominent. As mentioned, you can visualize this information design in practice as a recommendation algorithm, a targeted advertising algorithm. And because of the automated nature of the algorithms, we feel that the commitment assumption that is important for Bayesian persuasion, it's more natural to hold in our setting. Here are the preview of the main results. So by using this public information design framework, this is public information design because the platform only design one information. There's only one information design that is the same for both the buyer and the seller. So by using this framework, we unify the analysis of personalized product recommendation and targeted advertising. So we're going to show that there are basically two sides of one coin. And we are also going to show that we can reformulate this platform's information design problem as an optimal control problem of consumer search length. The idea is that by deciding how much information and what kind of information to reveal, the platform essentially will influence how much the consumer will search. So the information design problem will essentially can be formulated as a control problem of consumer search length. We show that there is a trade-off between match efficiency and surplus extraction. The surplus extraction is from the sellers by inducing seller competing for the prominence. And we also show that the optimal design may be socially inefficient because the optimal design may limit consumer search and mix the matched product with a long tail of unmatched products for product recommendation. So due to the time, I will skip the literature review and jump directly to the model. Okay. So the model we consider a two-sided market. So a platform. The commission rate is exogenous. There's some commission rate alpha. There are n number of sellers. Their production cost normalized as 0, and we'll use a index n. And there are I consumers, index I. Now, this is one of the most important assumptions we make for the model. That is, we assume that there is one and only one seller that matches with each consumer. Okay, particularly for a matched seller, for the matched seller for a particular consumer, there is an elastic demand. And for the unmatched sellers, there's 0 demand. So this is a binary match. This can be thought of as the extreme case where consumers have very strong preference. So they like some sellers and they don't like others. Okay, and the reason we make this assumption is because the match will actually be the state of the world where the platform will design information upon. And this assumption basically simplifies the state of the world a lot. Because there's only one seller, so the state of the world just become which seller is the match. That's the state of the world. Consumers' outside option of not buying anything from the platform is normalized as 0. So a priori, we assume that all sellers are equally likely to be a match. This also simplifies the analysis a lot. So I will touch upon this point later when we look at specific model analysis. So we have a uniform prior for all the consumers. Okay, so this is the model setting for the two-sided market. So I will give a little bit more details about how consumers make a search decision and how sellers make advertising decision. So for consumer search, it's a sequential search for match values and prices. So it's essentially a Walensky model. Search cost C A prominent position with zero search cost. So you can also make this a positive search cost. So what we require here is that the consumer start their searching with the prominent position. The platform holds a second price auction separately for each consumer, and we show that it can be robust if we add a reservation price. And the sellers will set the price and also the bid for each consumer. So here the price is the same for all the consumers, but the bid could be different for different consumers. So therefore, this is targeted advertising. Lastly, about the information design, the state of the world, as I mentioned, can be represented by this vector, where N1 is the index of the match seller for consumer one, and so on. So we have an n-dimensional vector that represents the state of the world. The platform designs the information structure. So pi. And the sellers and consumers, they observe pi and also a signal realization S. So just to help us understand this a bit more, we can consider two special cases. The first case is a perfect information. That is, the signal is just equal to the state of the world. In this case, you can think about this as like recommend the perfect match to each consumer. The second is totally uninformative. So you have the S does not depend on omega at all. In this case, you have a random recommendation. Okay. All right. Here is the model. It's a summary of the model and also the timeline. So the platform commits to an information structure pi, and then a signal S realized according to pi. And sellers and consumers observe the platform's choice of the information structure and the signal realization. The sellers set the price and bid, and then consumers observe which seller take the prominent position. And then they decide, should I continue to search, or should I just purchase from this seller, or should I take the outside option? Okay, so that's the timeline. So next, I'm going to move to the equilibrium analysis. First, we have the following lemma that basically pin down the equilibrium price. We show that in any perfect Bayesian equilibrium, every seller with a positive demand will set the price at the monopoly level. This is a direct implication because we have this binary match. So for any model with a binary match, it's easy to argue that basically in a similar manner of diamond paradox, you can argue that the seller will set a monopoly price. So we have this on purpose because we want to simplify the pricing decisions. So essentially, the pricing decisions become inactive in our model. Now, given this monopoly price, then in a transaction between a matched party, we can calculate the consumer will always expect the following surplus U, and the seller will get a profit V. Okay, so because there is a elastic demand. So it will be convenient to work just with U and V instead of D directly. Okay, so in the following analysis, I'm going to work directly with U and V. So that is the how they split the pie in a matched party. Okay, the search cost needs to be positive, but not higher than consumer surplus. Otherwise, no consumer wants to search. And second is we have the following lemma that characterizes the consumer's optimal search strategy. So it's quite intuitive. Consumer should search by the descending order of her posterior belief. So the platform first design the information, and then there is a signal arrive. Now, based on this signal, the consumer will have a posterior belief about which seller will be the match. Okay, so you can think of, let's say, the consumer belief seller 2 has a 50% with a match, seller 3 has a 20% with a match, and so on. Okay, and then if the consumer decides to search, what is his optimal search strategy? Well, she will search by the descending order of her posterior belief. Now, this sounds a little bit straightforward, but there is some complication behind it because in our setting, all the sellers are not independent because there is one and only one seller. So it means that, so let's say if I find out that seller 1 is not a match, then the consumer will know that the rest of the sellers will be more likely to be a match because there will be one match, always be one match. So it means that when a consumer searches one seller, she will update her belief about all other sellers. This will violate the independence assumption of Weizmann's model. So we cannot apply Weizmann directly, but we can essentially, but because the model in our setting, the setting is simple enough, you can still characterize the consumer search strategy in the following way. Okay, so given that, in the following, I'm going to analyze 2 benchmarks. These 2 benchmarks will help us understand the trade-off or the mechanism behind the model, and then I will look at the general information design problem. So the first benchmark I'm looking at is full information design. So in this benchmark, the platform just reveal the perfect information to the market. So given this is full information design, then we know that the consumer, then we can show that all sellers will be 0. And then the platform will actually let the match seller win the auction. But of course, the match seller does not need to pay anything. This is a second price auction because all other sellers be 0. So the match seller will earn a profit of V minus the commission. So it's a 1 minus alpha times V. Consumers do not need to search because the match seller already takes a prominent position. So they just buy from the prominent seller, and consumer expect a surplus of yield. And the platform obtains a profit of alpha times the number of consumers times V. Basically, the platform only get commission. There is no advertising revenue. Okay, so therefore, under this full information design, the auction is as if inactive, even though the market is organized by auctions, but the auction is as if inactive, and we essentially end up with a pure personalized recommendation strategy. Okay, so basically our full information design replicate a pure recommendation strategy. Next, I'll talk about no information design. So on the no information design, basically the platform just recommend randomly. So they design the information structure to be a random, totally random. And in this case, consumers' posterior belief will be the same as the prior belief. So they believe all the sellers are equally likely to be a match. So we can show that consumer has the following search strategy: is none or all. If the search cost is very low, then the consumer will search until she finds a match. Otherwise, the consumer will never search beyond the prominent seller, the advertiser seller. The intuition is the following, because during the search process, the consumer actually become more and more optimistic. So when I see the seller 1 is not a match, I update all the match probabilities for the other sellers higher And because all other sellers are equally likely to be a match, so it means that if I want to search seller 1, I will be willing to search seller 2 because seller 2 is more likely to be a match than seller 1. And if I find out seller 2 is not a match, I'm more willing to search seller 3. So therefore, it will becomes a none or all strategy for consumer search. Then we can show that this is the market equilibrium. So if the search cost is very low, essentially consumer will keep searching until she finds a match. Then we have basically complete information, right? Because consumers going to find out who is the match. So this is as if there is perfect information. The only difference is that consumer need to pay a search cost. So we have consumer surplus is U minus some expected search cost. Now, otherwise, when the search cost is not so low, then we show that all sellers will beat their expected match probability times the payoff upon a match. So we know that they're equally likely to be a match. So that's why we have 1 over n here. And so 1 minus alpha is after commission, and V is the payoff upon match. Okay. And then because in this case, the platform commits not to use information, so therefore a random seller will win. And because it's a second price auction, so all sellers be the same. So therefore, this seller will get 0 profit. Consumers will only consider the advertised product or the prominent product. And because each product is equally likely to be a match, so the match probability will be 1 over n times the consumer utility U upon a match. The platform get profit from both this is the commission and the advertising revenue. So the advertising revenue come from seller's bid, and the commission come from a consumer's expected match. So if you add them together, this is IV divided by n. So we can see that the no information design basically replicates a pure n-targeted sponsor search ad strategy. So that was the strategy used by Amazon before 2019. So after that, Amazon started allow targeted advertising. Okay, so we basically have 2 benchmarks, and we can compare them. So if we compare them, when I just compare these 2 extreme cases, when the search cost is very low, the platform will be indifferent between a no information design or a full information design, because the consumer is going to search anyway under no information design. On the other hand, as long as search cost is not so low, and then there is a meaningful distinction between these 2 designs. Particularly, we show that when alpha, that is a commission, times n, that is a number of sellers, when alpha times n is greater than 1, the platform prefers full information. Otherwise, it prefers no information. So the trade-off is quite straightforward. So there is a trade-off between match efficiency and surplus extraction. So from the platform's perspective, by supplying more information, you can get a better match. A better match means a higher commission. But on the other hand, more information will make the sellers more heterogeneous. When sellers become more heterogeneous, they will reduce their incentive to compete and lower the advertising revenue. So basically, the platform's trade-off between sales commission and advertising revenue is due to this match efficiency and surplus extraction trade-off. Okay, so we have analyzed the 2 benchmark cases. So next, I will give you a little bit more ideas how we formalize the platform's information design problem. So we see that the auction is personalized, and also the price is inactive. So it's always monopoly price. So this will basically allow us to separate consumers' problem for each consumer. So essentially, we have we only need to consider one consumer. So let's just consider a representative consumer I. This consumer has a posterior belief upon receiving a signal Si. This mu n is basically denotes what is the probability that the matched seller is n. So the seller n is the matched seller, because ni by definition is the matched seller for consumer I. Okay, so ni equal to n is the matched seller is seller n. You notice that when we write mu n, we do not have an s here. This is on purpose. So if you're familiar with Bayesian persuasion, essentially in Bayesian persuasion, you deal with the distribution of posterior belief. But here we can deal with posterior belief directly. The reason is that all the sellers are exactly symmetric. So then basically different signals essentially induce a permutation. You can think about if I reveal one kind of signal, then seller one will more likely to be a match. Another type will be maybe seller two will be more likely to be a match. So in the paper, we basically prove that we can deal with the posterior belief directly, where what really matters is mu1, mu2 up to mu n. So without loss of generality, we can rank them in a descending order. So basically, what really, in the end, what really matters is the distribution, the posterior belief distribution, okay? So the platform's problem essentially becomes trying to design this posterior belief subjected to the normalization condition to maximize the profit. Okay, so next I will basically show you how we calculate the profit, this pi mu function.
So just a quick clarifying question. So for that, do we need that pi is the concave function, this profit function, or because otherwise one would think that you couldn't benefit from some randomization over beliefs?
That's a good question. Is it a concave function? What do you mean by concave? This is a multi-dimensional. You mean like a
no, I mean the pi,
module,
capital pi, the profit function.
The capital pi?
The one in the objective, maximum pi, yes.
Yeah. This is the mu here is a vector.
Right, and the pi is a function of that vector. Is it a concave function?
It's a concave. When we have multi-dimensional, do we still have concave? I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, we can postpone the question because
so you maybe you can see later, because we do not exactly use when we think about concavity, we think about optimality condition. We do not use that directly to solve this problem. So I haven't never thought about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. How we calculate this pi mu? To calculate this pi mu, so we introduce a definition called search length. This is defined as the number of sellers, including the prominent one, this consumer will visit if she has not found a match yet. Okay, so if she has not found a match yet, the number of sellers she will visit. Now, of course, this number will depend on two things. First is the consumer's posterior belief. That is the mu here. Second is who takes the prominent position. So that is n. So we basically will assume that given consumer posterior belief as mu and given seller n takes the prominent position, then we can calculate the search length by solving consumers' optimal search problem. That is the L, okay? And we introduce, sorry to introduce so many different notations. So there's another, this is important because we're trying to reformalize this problem. So there's another pi. So in previously, here, this pi is defined on the posterior belief, okay? But here, this is different. This is a different pi. This pi depend on the posterior belief, and also L. So this is defined as platform's revenue given the posterior belief and a exogenously given search length L. So you can think about if the platform can exogenously fix consumer search length at L and given consumers belief mu, what would be the resulting consumer search strategy and the resulting platform revenue. And in the paper, we basically show that the pi mu, which is something we're interested, can be linked to this new definition by the following equation. So it will be if we put a equilibrium search length into this function, then we get these two are equal. So this is not as straightforward as it seems, but due to the time, I will not dig into the details. So the complexity lies on the off equilibrium path. It's but let's just take this as it is. And then we can actually write down the pi mu L as the following, right? So because if the platform can exogenously fix consumer search length at L, then we know that seller 1 up to seller L minus 1 will be 0 because there will be search anyway, right? So if they are the match, they will be searched. So there's no point to take the prominent position. Therefore, there will be 0. And therefore, actually, seller L will be the winner. Remember here, the seller 1 to seller N, their belief is in a descending order. Okay, so seller L will be the winner because then seller L's speed will be higher than seller L plus 1. So we can write down the platform's profit as the following. There is a commission fee that comes from all the possible match from all the L sellers and advertising revenue. Okay, so the commission will only come from the L sellers because the consumer will only search L sellers. And the advertising revenue comes from seller L plus 1 speed. Okay, so then we can rewrite the platform's problem as the following. So the platform is essentially trying to choose the search length. Of course, this search length must be the equilibrium choice of the consumer. So we have this constraint here. But now, because given this, we can actually write down this pi mu L function. We can actually solve this one by one. So we can solve the problem for each given search length L. Okay, so hopefully this gives you a little bit taste of the analysis. So I'm not going to bore you with more details. So this is the equilibrium. Okay, the equilibrium is that if the search cost is low, in the previous comparison of the two benchmarks, we already see that the platform will be indifferent between no information and full information. Here, we basically show that this result is more general. Actually, any posterior belief generates the same platform revenues. Now, otherwise, if the search cost is not so low, we find that there are two cases depending on the commission rate. So if the commission rate is relatively high, then we show that the optimal design is a full information. So this is a full information design. Otherwise, the design is a little bit more complex. So the platforms will try to trying to recommend two products with relatively high probability and a long tail of products with equal but low probability. So I'll give a little bit more intuition about this case in the next slide. Okay, so under this information design, the consumers will only visit the prominent seller. So the consumers will just search the prominent seller, will never continue to search. And we show that this is Bayesian plausible. Okay, so let me give you a little bit intuition about the optimal information design in the second case. So this is basic. So the platform's optimal information design is the following. So suppose N, the true state of the world is N. That is, seller N is the matched seller. Then the information structure is that then the platform, upon receiving N, S will be, with some probability, will be equal to N. So there's some probability that the platform will indeed recommend the matched seller, but there are also some probability that the platform will recommend a unmatched seller with high probability. And there's also a bunch of all other sellers the platform will recommend with low probability. Now, upon receiving this information structure and signal, the consumer will have the following belief that seller N has this probability to be the matched seller, and seller N+1 has this probability to be the matched seller, and all other sellers have a relatively low probability to be a matched seller. So why this is the optimal information design? Well, if you think about the platform's revenue, it comes from two parts. First is a commission, and second is advertising revenue. So we want to recommend the matched seller with a high probability because this will ensure there is a good match there is a match with good probability, and therefore this will guarantee we have good commission. On the other hand, for advertising revenue, it's a little bit more complicated. We basically want, so we call this contender. We want to maximize the contender's reward upon winning, and also minimize the contender's reward upon losing. This will incentivize the contender to beat the higher possible. So this by recommending this contender with a high probability, this gives this contender a high reward upon winning, because he knows that if he wins, he has this probability to be the match. So he's more likely to beat high. On the other hand, we also want to keep a long tail of unmatched sellers because if we don't do that, then after consumers, let's say the consumer visit the prominent position first and find out the prominent position is not the match. Now, if we don't have this long tail, then the consumer will be sure that the next seller will be the match because then she update her belief upon seeing not a match from the prominent position. She will infer that the next seller will be 100% to be the match. Then, knowing that this seller has no incentive to beat because she knows that even if I lose this, I will still get the consumer, right? So by keeping this long tail, we ensure that after consumer seeing the prominent position is not a match, the consumer still does not want to search. So then this seller will know that, okay, so if I don't win the position, I will not be searched. So then I have a strong incentive to win. So that's why we want to keep a long tail. This long tail gives this seller a incentive to bid high. Okay, I think I'm a little bit out of
you
time
have two more minutes.
2 more minutes?
Yep.
Okay, that's great. So, we know that the socially optimal design is full information design. This means that our analysis implies that the sponsored ads, so this incentive, the platform's revenue from advertising may introduce some social inefficiency because it involves noisy matching. And we show that as search cost gets higher, or when there are more sellers on the platform, the noisy matching is more likely to arise and the platform profit can increase. Just to conclude, so we offer a unified understanding of personalized recommendation and targeted advertising. So these two things in our framework can be captured by the public information design framework. We show that the optimal information design strategy may be socially efficient when the commission rate is relatively low. And it is socially efficient because it entails limiting consumer search and mixing the matched product with a long tail of unmatched ones for recommendation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. You're perfect on time. And now we will have discussion by Andrew Rhodes. Andrew, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me fine?
Yep.
Okay, so first of all, thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to read and discuss this paper, which I enjoyed a lot. So as you saw from the presentation, it's very topical. It's taking issues from I/O like platform design and consumer search, and then merging them with tools from theory like information design. And it does this using what I think is quite a simple but very elegant and parsimonious model. And even though the model is quite simple, the analysis is certainly non-trivial, and it leads to quite rich, interesting findings. Okay, so I just have a few minor comments. So my first kind of most important comment is that if I understood correctly, this is already R&R anyway, so you may not want to change too much. But with that said, let me go through a few, or give a few suggestions. So my first kind of comment or suggestion is about this match technology that you employ. So you basically assume that there's exactly one product in the market which matches. So this is kind of going back to this Chen and her paper, the EJ paper, and maybe even before then, Yongmin Chen's work. So the advantage of that is it makes the pricing very simple, which I think is a good thing to do here. Otherwise, things would be very complicated. I guess, you know, you might question the assumption that consumers match with exactly one firm. So as you say in the conclusion, obviously, if you match with, for sure, with multiple firms, then things are a little bit trivial. But I wondered what happens if there's some chance that a consumer actually doesn't match with any firm. Because obviously pricing will be exactly the same, it'll still be simple, but consumers have less search incentive, which maybe gives the platform more power on the advertising side. So I wondered if you'd thought about that. Something a little bit related is at some point in the paper, you have comparative statics in the number of firms, which I think is fine and interesting, but of course it's a little bit special because as you increase N, you're reducing the probability that each existing firm matches. So like you're basically changing two things at the same time. So that was kind of my first comment about the match technology. Another comment is that in the model, all the firms are symmetric ex ante in the sense that they all match with equal probability. And I think we're all guilty of assuming this in models because it makes things, makes the pricing much more tractable. But here, of course, the pricing is already quite simple and tractable. So I wondered if you thought about what would happen if you had some asymmetries in match probabilities. Can you say anything interesting, right? Because obviously if there are some firms where the match probability is very high, then again, consumers are probably going to go and search them anyway, which means that they don't have to bid very aggressively. So I'm wondering if you want to, if you can characterize what you should do. Presumably the platform should try and handicap those firms. So that was another comment. Another comment about participation. So you assume that all the consumers are already participating on the platform. And I just wondered, you know, so what would happen if they had maybe an outside option, you know, or maybe some stochastic outside option? Can you think about how the platform design should be changed? The information design should be changed to encourage consumers to participate. And in the case where you have a low search cost, I just wonder if this could act as a tie break, right? Because technically you show that any design is going to lead to the same outcome. So can you maybe use participation as a tiebreaker? Another comment. So Alex, how much time do I have left?
2 minutes.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Okay, I think it should be fine. So another comment, which you didn't touch much upon in the talk, is this assumption that you basically have symmetric signals for both the consumers and the sellers. So as you say somewhere in the paper, of course, that would be complicated if you had different signals, because each side would have to update given what they saw about what the other side might have seen. But, you know, I wondered if there's anything interesting to be said, maybe at some point in the paper, by looking at, say, a one-sided benchmark. So what if you only give a signal to the consumer side? I guess you want to give them, right? If the search cost is small, then it doesn't really matter. But if the search cost is large, I guess you want to give them a perfect recommendation so that you maximize commissions. If you're only giving a signal to the seller side, I guess you don't want to give perfect recommendations, otherwise you're not going to get any bidding. So it seems like those two could be interesting benchmarks, and you can compare that with what happens when you give the symmetric signal to both sides. Maybe let me just finish with a couple of other minor things. You know, so again, there's some discussion of this in the paper. Maybe you can make it more explicit. You could think about the platform's incentives to obfuscate, so basically choose the search cost. Maybe the platform can choose at some cost to have a higher search cost, and it seems like it's weakly better off doing that. Of course, it's a cheap point, but the alpha here is taken as given. And you could discuss that. One thing, if I understood correctly, is that there could be actually a perverse effect of a higher alpha, right? In the sense that if you compare the full and the no information benchmarks, if the search cost is small, there's nothing interesting happening anyway. It's the same outcome. But if the search cost is large, it seemed to me that if you increase alpha, so the share that the platform is taking, at some point you're going to flip from no information to full information. And it seems like that's actually going to benefit the sellers and the consumers. Right, so the fact that you have this distortion due to the information design means you get this kind of perverse comparative static with respect to the alpha. I'm not sure if that's interesting or not, but it may be worth pointing that out somewhere. And let me just finish with a couple of small presentational things. So personally, I found it a little bit annoying reading the paper when you had this I everywhere in the platform profit expression. So why not just set I equals 1, given that you don't have any participation? And another thing is that you have this, you introduced at some point this notation x plus or minus 0. So again, you didn't go through this in the presentation, but in the slides, at some point you had plus or minus 0. So if I understood correctly, this is basically epsilon tending to 0. So I'm just wondering, can you say a little bit more about that? Is this basically, if you broke ties, would you not need that? Or given that this is an epsilon when you're taking the limit, does that mean that the optimum is not well defined? That wasn't clear to me. So I think maybe some discussion of that, you know, before you introduce that in the paper would be good. And Alex, I'm done. So I hand back to you.
Great, perfect.